Thank you everyone for logging in. It's nice to see the old faces again, as well as welcome to the new people that's logged in today. All right, we're going to talk about competency-based interviews today. So I am Cecilia Denton, and I'm an industrial psychologist. I'm the owner of PTES Consulting. So we do psychometric assessment, but we also provide HR support, and we work together with HR Talk, who's arranged this online webinar. And today we will be talking about competency-based interviews. So I think you will find this very interesting. Those of you that's maybe heard of it before, doesn't know exactly how to do your own, you'll find this very helpful. It's very, very simple. There's just a few things that you need to know. So what we will be talking about today is a little bit of background and content to psychometric assessment and how it links to the competency-based interviews, statistics on the validity and reliability of all screening tools, and then we will just talk about the problem that we will be addressing today with the competency-based interviews. And then we will look at how do normal interviews differ from competency-based interviews. So there is a big difference. So skills and competencies that we can measure through a competency-based interview, and then how does it work? And there's a little bit of an exercise, and then what do competency-based questions look like? And then I'm going to show you the process of developing your own. So I always use a little help from others when you set up your own competency-based questionnaire. But from now on forward, doing a normal, a very unstructured interview should be something of the past. You will see now how unreliable that really is. All right, so I wish I could actually ask a few of you some of your experiences with employing people where it's backfired or gone seriously wrong. I think there's a lot of stories in my experience. I've also heard a lot of stories, and I mean, it's just part of life. So I wish I could hear from you what you have experienced before. So I want to look at two things now. So scenario one is I want you to think back of a time when you were interviewed for a position. So maybe when you were a little bit younger in the past, did you feel that you were evaluated objectively? Did you feel that there were purpose behind the questions? Did you feel that you got a fair chance to demonstrate your skills, your knowledge, and your experience? So myself, I've been in interviews where I didn't do any talking. I was briefed by people and I barely got a word in, which was strange. And then there was the typical interviews where I was asked what was my strengths and weaknesses, and people actually helped me prepare for those questions and how to answer it. So I'm sure some of you have also experienced that. And then scenario two, I want you to think of the times when you appointed someone and it went terribly wrong. So did you have a structured plan when interviewing the candidate, or did you just ask random questions? Did you appoint based on how you felt about the candidate, like the feeling that you had? The answers were answered quite firmly. The person looked assertive. They were dressed well. They were expressing themselves and articulating themselves well. So I want you to look at both sides of the scale here, because it's not just on the one side that you can benefit. You also you actually really want to get the benefit for your organization when you look at candidates to see whether you can get the best one. So look at it from both points of view. All right, and then look at psychometric assessment. So I don't think I have to tell a lot of people the cost of a bad hire. And every session that we've had, I touch on this, and I do that on purpose because I want to reiterate the fact that it costs your organization a lot of money, a lot of time, as this negatively impacts your company, and sometimes in terms of money that you can't even see. So firstly, here, the cost of a bad hire is estimated at 5 times the annual salary. So often you can't see the damage. You can't always put an exact number to it, but it's not just the salary that you're paying that person for that period of time. It stretches further than that. And then 36% of organizations state that a bad hire negatively impacts employee engagement. So now we're not even talking about the effect that that person has on the rest of the team and the disruption. Sometimes we can't calculate it, but it can be devastating. And then the last one, 10 billion was lost in terms of productivity, cost due to labor unrest in South Africa in recent years. So firstly, I want to tell you that competency-based interviews increases the validity and the reliability of your recruitment process up to 55%. That's quite a lot. But now I'm talking about a structured interview, not a normal interview. So together with psychometric assessment, reference checks, performance history checks, any type of information that you can gather from this person will increase the reliability and the validity of your selection process. So never do things in isolation. Don't think there's one answer to all. A lot of times people also think that psychometric assessment should be the crystal ball and give you the answer. That you do in conjunction with a whole bunch of other things, and you build your case. I've had enough experience to see that often the quiet person in the interview that you're not impressed with, that's the good performer, just because they don't sell themselves so well. So I've seen this so many times. I don't take face value at all anymore. All right, so I also show this graph every single time when we do a webinar because I cannot reiterate this enough. So if we look at the selection measures linked to job performance, look at all the selection measures that you can use to interview or to select someone. So let's start right at the bottom. Graphology is handwriting expertise. I've mentioned this before. You can do this when you solve a crime or a murder, but not with recruitment selection. It's going to be pretty useless for you. Years education doesn't mean much. You can do qualification checks. Interest questionnaires doesn't really mean much because what I'm interested in doesn't mean that I'm really good at it. Years of job experience, it counts for a little. It will add a little bit, but most importantly, see where unstructured interviews lie. They are giving it quite a lot of recognition here, and we're saying that it's a little bit less than 20%, although some researchers actually say that it's much less. So we're actually being quite nice here by giving it almost 20% reliability and validity. So an unstructured interview, which is just your normal interview where you just ask people random questions, has got very little validity. References counts for a little bit. I do not want to throw references out of the window because it's nice just to get a glimpse of the background. It can be extremely subjective, but it's just nice to just hear whether there wasn't something up like a disciplinary hearing or a dispute of some sorts, to just get clarity on it. So just a glimpse on that will also help, but never ever do this in isolation. You could be put on the wrong track in a bad way. Biodata, that is just information about the person. That could be just anything about the person. How long have they studied, where did they study, years experience, work experience, anything that's significant to the person. Assessment centers works very, very well, but you want to combine it with a psychometric tool. So an assessment center would be exercises. It's actually very nice to do exercises like that, where you have open group discussions or leaderless group discussions where you physically observe the candidate while they are participating in exercises with other people. So physical exercises are very, very nice, but you can see the validity is not very high, but this works very well in combination with psychometrics, with a scientific tool. So the two goes hand in hand together very well. We did this for graduate recruitment at Vodacom, the combination of this, and it was worked out brilliantly. Personality questionnaires alone does not account for a validity that's high enough. You'll see that right at the top here, we've got personality and ability. You don't want to do personality, even if it's a psychometric test, personality in isolation. We often have people asking us for that because they want to save money. It's just not good enough. You're wasting your time and your money. Rather do personality and ability together with a competency-based interview. Job knowledge test is also, it shows you a little bit of information about the candidate. Then we get to the structured interview. Can you see the difference between a structured interview and an unstructured interview? it's more than double, just because you follow a process, and the process is not difficult at all. So you increase your validity and reliability more than double. Right at the top here, you'll see if I combine my structured interview with an ability test, it adds even more reliability. So once again, don't do anything in combination. What will be perfect is a personality questionnaire, ability test, and a structured interview. You can see that just below this, there's also work sample test. If you have anything that's related to the job that you can give the person as a practical example, that will work. And ability test on its own is a little bit better than personality test on its own, but also just a tad. But still, it's going to give you limited information. You want a combination. So the combination of all of this will help you significantly. So this graph, please take note of it. Do not forget it. We will send you this afterwards, after the exercise, so that you can please remember this. All right, so let's look at the problem. So researchers argue that interview reliability can be as low as 5%. So remember on the previous graph, I said we gave it almost 20%. There are researchers that saying interview reliability, a normal interview, unstructured interview, is very low. I think there's researchers that says it's even lower. So it's going to depend on what it looks like, but you don't want to play around with even 20%. It's useless. So the more the structure of the interview decreases, the more the reliability drops. So you want to give your interview process now, you're going to give it structure. There's going to be a format there. Then this variation can be because there are differences between interviewers in terms of questions asked, data collected, and the way that the data is interpreted. It is so incredibly subjective that anyone can make an assumption based on what it is that they see in front of a person when they, even if you have 3 panel members and you have one candidate being interviewed, between the 3, if it's an unstructured interview, can be just as unreliable as just having one panel member. This is not necessarily a deliberate effort to distort the process on the part of the interview, but rather due to the interactive nature of the interview and the various biases and limits that impact on human decision making. So it's not like we're trying to be biased or subjective. Most of the time when people do interviews, they're trying their hardest to be objective. But if you follow an unstructured process, your attempt for objectivity, you just cannot help it. The biases will come in because those are things that you've seen in your life. It just will come in. If someone expresses themselves confidently, dress very nicely, all those things are going to impress you. It's got nothing to do with a person's skill or competence. Absolutely nothing. So one-to-one interviews with standardized questions appear to have the highest reliability. So anything that gets standardized or structured that's similar already works a little bit better. So when interviewers were trained in the interview process and about how to avoid biases, reliability also tends to be higher. So you also want to, if you do competency-based interviews or structured interviews, you do want to train people on how to do it. It doesn't help just the HR person knows how to do it, but when the line manager or whoever comes in, they don't really know what process you follow. Train everyone and do exactly the same process. You're going to save time as it is, because with a normal interview, the talking starts and it gets happy and jolly if it's a very extroverted person and you actually don't get to any point. So interviewee appearances, accents, physical appearance, and the candidates and interviewers' experience can all have a significant impact on the outcome of the interview. Isn't that true? That first physical appearance is the thing that makes the most impact. It does have a small part to play. Those are all things that you do want to look at. You do want to look at the attitude, all of that, but that's just, it's got its place. It's got a little percentage that it adds, but that's not the skill and the competence that you're looking for. So don't let those things take the center stage, because that's what happens in unstructured interviews. So then interviewer ratings are significantly influenced by both verbal and non-verbal behavior in a very big way. So if you have an introverted person in an interview that don't sell themselves very well, and I've seen this firsthand so many times, that the quiet person is the one that does the best on the psychometric test or the work sample test, or the physical type of simulation test that they needed to do. It's scary that you can be this wrong. So just be very aware of the extrovert versus the introvert, and those cues that you're getting. So, and sometimes maybe someone is not even introverted. They could just be shy as well. They could also just be nervous. So take all of those things in account. All right, let me just see. I've got a question here. I'm going to answer the questions right at the end. So please, as we go along, write them down. I would love to answer them for you and go through them systematically. All right, so I want to touch base on, okay, yeah, sorry, I almost jumped to this one. So the interviewer ratings are significantly influenced by both verbal and nonverbal behavior. So this raises the possibility that impression management by the candidate can have a significant impact on interview decision making. So impression management is a term that you need to get familiar with. So we look at impression management, or we call it social desirability. That is something that we look for in psychometric assessment after the person has completed the test, to see whether the person tried to make themselves look good. So impression management or social desirability is, in very simple terms, when someone is trying to make themselves look better than they are because they want to create a good impression. That is something that's normal with most people. Of course, you want to create a good impression. You do that when you meet people as well. In an interview, you do want to do that. You actually do want to have someone who's at least a little bit concerned about that, because we do want to create a good impression when we meet other people. You do want someone who's socially aware and who's emotionally at least in tune with what they do. But we want to have a limit on that where that doesn't take over, because impression management, if it goes too far, it can become lying. So there's a very thin line between, am I just trying to make myself look good, or am I blatantly lying? So another thing that you need to know from a normal interview, you probably know this, is that people have learned how to cream the interview. They've gotten advice from how to answer certain questions. So there's no way that you can detect whether someone is lying, except if the story becomes so creative that you just don't believe it. But most of the time, there's no way that you can really tell. So this impression management is the thing that everyone has. Any human being is who they are, but then there's a persona. The persona is always the thing that they want other people to see of who they really are. So the third point here, good eye contact, positive body language, and physical attractiveness can lead to higher scores in interviews, but generally only for candidates who provide good answers to the questions posed. So can you see that this person can actually create a very positive impression in an interview by dressing very well, sitting up straight, making eye contact, being very firm and assertive, answering good questions, but are you still able to see the actual skill and competence? So that is the big problem. So this could create a total false impression if the person has learned how to do this well. So in terms of impression management, self-promotion of past and future behavior by the interviewee tend to lead to higher interviewer evaluations. So however, there's some debate about whether these effects are biases. Okay, so this is why I'm telling you that there should be a balance when it comes to impression management. So we don't want to penalize someone for trying to look good and trying to create a good impression. You don't want to do that, but you also don't want the person to go ahead to such an extent that it becomes lying and manipulation. But you do want a little bit of impression management, because if you want a salesperson or someone that deals with customers, you need them to manage their own emotions and attitudes, for example, in front of a very angry client or trying to seal a deal. So that's why I mentioned this last point here. Positive body language and an ability to manage the impression one gives to others may be viewed as a skill that also has a significant impact on job performance. For example, an employee dealing with an irate customer often needs to use impression management. So the employee may be feeling angry, but needs to maintain calm, friendly, and with professional behavior. So excellent customer service does go along with an employee really knowing how to control their own emotions and knowing how to manage that client in order not to lose them. So a little bit of that we do want, and we are aware of it. That's why when we look at salespeople or marketing people, we do want a combination of persuasiveness, outspokenness, with healthy manipulation. You get different types of manipulation. You get deviant, bad type of manipulation, but then you get manipulation where I sell you my product, and I do that in a way that I show you that you need what it is that I can give you. So we don't want to throw all of that out of the window. So always keep in mind that you want a balance of this. We do want a balance of impression management. So how do competence-based interviews differ from the normal interview? So the normal interview, also called an unstructured interview, are essentially a conversation where the interviewers are asked questions that are relevant to what they are looking for, but without specific aim in mind, other than getting an overall impression of you as an employee, or as an individual. So questions are fairly random and can sometimes be quite open. For example, a question such as, what can you offer our company? How often have you heard that? I think I've asked that even when I was younger and more naive. Is meant to gather general information about you, but does not test any specific skill or competency. So in an unstructured interview, the candidate is judged on the general impression that he or she leaves. The process is therefore likely to be more subjective. So isn't that true? In an unstructured interview, it's all about the general impression. It's not about a specific skill. We're trying to get there, but the problem also now is the very convincing person can convince you that they are good enough, although we're actually not talking about a specific skill or competence. So that can be very, very vague. So now the competency-based interview, this is also called a structured or a behavioral interview, more systematic, with each question targeting a specific skill or competency. So candidates are asked questions relating to their behavior in specific circumstances when they need to back it up with concrete examples. So the interviewers will then dig further into examples by asking for specific explanations about the candidate's behavior or skill. So the difference between the two that we found in a normal interview, people prepare themselves already, like what you're going to ask, like what's your strengths, what can you offer our company, what's my development areas, things like that. How do you problem solve, or are you a good problem solver? So you think of things already that you can conjure up when they ask you. So you're very assertive when you answer that thing. But when you are asked, it's also easier for you to lie. It's very, very easy because you can just say yes or no. When you do a competency-based interview, you have to think back of an example, and you can clearly see when someone is struggling to actually align the question to something that's already happened. So it's more difficult. It takes longer to lie and to make something up. You will also find that when someone doesn't have an example, they will start talking about what they would do. So that's not what you want. You want to hear where they were, where they've done something similar, where they can relate. The nice thing about this is, well, if you've got 3 candidates that you want to compare because you want to see the best one out of the 3, you'll clearly see the guy that was able to give you examples quickly. They were relevant, they were on the right seniority level with the right type of experience, versus the guys that will give you very, very simple examples. That's maybe not where you want it, or not examples at all. So you can almost take your 3 candidates and you can almost plot them in order of who actually could answer properly with good examples, and you will be able to see who's actually done this before a little bit more than another one. So in your head, if you've never done competence-based interviews before, this is something that you would still need to experience. But if you're used to competency-based interviews, you'll know what it is that I'm talking about. It just falls into place. It just does that automatically if done correctly. So let's look at skills and competencies for interviews. So you can measure almost everything, but we can look at adaptability, compliance, communication, conflict management, creativity, innovation, decisiveness, delegation, external awareness, flexibility, teamwork, independence, influencing styles, integrity, leadership, diversity, organizational awareness, resilience, tenacity, risk-taking, and sensitivity to others. These are just a few. But what I would suggest is for a specific position, you would list down the competencies that you want to see. Don't make it too long, mustn't be complicated. But this is just to show you that you can actually look at quite a few things. So let's look at how does it work. So a competency is a concept linking three things, and that is knowledge, skills, and attitude. So it's not just analytical thinking, it's knowledge about it, it's the skill to deal with it, it's the attitude about it. So for example, you might have good interpersonal skills, but you may not be competent to join the company as a project manager unless you possess adequate education or experience or knowledge and the right temperament, behavior, or attitude about it. So can you see that it's not very linear? It actually multifaceted in the sense that you could have a great person with interpersonal skills. They're warm, they're just a very good person. They're just not skilled for the position that you want them to be in and right for the company. So it's happened before that we've psychometrically assessed people, and we take the option or candidate number 2 because candidate number 1 was really, really great. But if you then do a competence-based interview and you see that that person does not have the knowledge, they may have interpersonal skills, the right attitude, they're great, but they just don't have the knowledge and experience that we require for that position. So it's really deeper than you may think. So competency-based interviews, also called structured interviews, are interviews where each question is designed to test one or more specific skills. So then the answer is then matched against pre-decided criteria. So you're going to have your little form already ready beforehand. You're going to know what it is that you're looking for. And as you ask your questions, you want to look for those specific things. So it's not vague. You'll then, when you get your answer from the candidate, know that I see it or didn't I. So for example, the interviewers may want to test the candidate's ability to deal with stress by asking first how the candidate generally handles stress, and then asking the candidate to provide an example of a situation where he's worked under pressure. All right, before I show you the process, I want to give you this quick exercise. I want to give you a question and an answer of an interview process, and then I want you to think about whether this candidate is a good candidate. It's a pity that I can't see your answers because I would love to know what you think. So the candidate has been asked to describe a time when they've experienced success in a teamwork environment, and to describe their role in that situation. So the question is, the candidate has been asked to describe a time when they've experienced success in a team work environment and describe their role in that situation. So the answer was, well, to be honest, we were just lucky to come together at the right time. I think that sometimes I work really well in a team, but it really depends whether the people around me are similar to me and whether or not they like me. I don't think it's really possible to change other people's views or opinions to get them to work better together with each other. That is quite a good answer if I have asked someone, how's their teamwork? So, but the question was that the candidate has been asked to describe a time when they've experienced success. So I want you to read that again, and in your head, just get yourself an answer whether you think this was a good answer or not. And remember, you are trying to identify whether this person has the skill and the knowledge and the attitude to be a good fit in the position that you're interviewing for. All right, but we're going to come back to the answer. Now, I'm going to show you what a competency-based questionnaire is and how to do your own, and then we're going to come back to your answer. So let's see the difference between the two types of questions. So an unstructured interview question would be, tell me more about yourself. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? How many people did you manage and how did you manage them? Are you a problem solver? Can you work with people? How well do you work in a team? So anyone can answer you anything on that. Let's look at a structured interview question. Tell me about a time that you had to solve a complex problem and had limited time and resources to do so. The next one, tell me about a time where you had to think out of the box and create a solution to a client-focused problem. And then lastly, describe a time when you were held responsible for the completion of a task or a project. So they have to go back to their previous work experience, give you an actual real-life example of the team players, the situation, what they did in there, and how they solved the problem. So I just want to now focus on the way that your question looks. So the first one says, tell me more about yourself. They can tell you anything. But a structured question will be, tell me about a time when you had to solve a complex problem. So can you see the difference? Right. Let's go through the process of how you're going to develop your own questionnaire. So the first step is to predetermine the competencies that you would like to see and list them. Then you're going to start with that. So for example, I took 2 here. I said, firstly, leading and deciding. And secondly, supporting and cooperating. So you can put anything there. You can put analytical thinking. You can just put problem solving, interpersonal skills. You can put anything there, but get those competencies out of your job description. So don't think it up or make it up. Go back to your job description, and the job description must be proper. It must be based on the task that you want that person to complete. That will indicate the level that you want the person to be on. Is it a middle management or very senior or very entry level role? And then you'll know that if I want interpersonal skills, is it very lower level, middle level, or very high level? And then you will structure these questions around that level of complexity. So let's look at leading and deciding. So leading and deciding is my first competency. So I'm going to determine questions in a structured manner that will be asked to all candidates in a similar manner. So the nice thing is a lot of companies get audited on their recruitment processes to see whether they've treated people fairly and objectively, and if all the candidates were asked the same questions. So this actually plays in your favor. To do it that way is going to give you better results. So whether you get audited at the end of the day, it's great because you follow this process in any way, but this process benefits you way more than anyone else. So you want to determine your questions and then ask every single candidate the exact same question, and so that you can look at the answer that you got. So that part is very important. So question 1 on leading and deciding. So you can have a few questions. I indicated 2 here. You don't want to make it too complicated. So tell me about a time when you had to make an important decision under severe pressure. So a little bit of a sub question. You can ask that question and wait for an answer first, and then you can probe by saying, what was the outcome? What would you have done differently? And you can ask these 2 bullet points. You can ask that with most of your questions. You can say, what was the outcome? What would you do differently? So they have to now go back to a point in time in the past where they made an important decision. And you'll see some people will not have an example. They will not have an example. So in a normal circumstances, in a normal interview, they would have told you, I'm great under pressure. I just work very well. The more pressure, the better. If they have to actually give you an example, you'll see some people will think more. I often tell people, take your time to think. I want you to think of a good example. I don't want you to just rush. And they can, according to their CV, tell you it was when I was working at APSA, I did A, B, and C. This was the scenario. You are more likely to see then if they're lying or not. For some reason, the fact that they have to make up something, it's more difficult. So you want to see you must describe the scenario to you. What happened? What was the outcome? What would you have done differently? So it doesn't have to be a favorable outcome. He can even tell you, the person can even tell you, it backfired badly. It was an incredible lesson that I had to learn. So never think that the fact that the person said the outcome was bad, that it's not in their favor. If they've learned from it, it's a good thing. So they can tell you a good thing or a bad outcome. So don't be biased when it comes to that, to the answer, as long as it's a real answer that you can fit. And it's a good example. So question 2 on the same competency is, tell me about a time when you made a mistake on a project. Very good question. You can give them a chance to answer, and then you can probe. How did you handle the situation? How could you have done it differently? And what did you learn from this? Once again, the outcome can be a positive one or a negative one. As long as this person can give you a good example and what they learned from it, you can score them accordingly. So let's go to the scoring sheet. So firstly, these are the things that you want to see. So these are the things that will tell me whether the person has got that skill or the knowledge about it. So can they tell you, or can you see from their example that they've made decisions promptly, took responsibility for their decision, made the decision with confidence, was aware of the consequences of the decision, works under own discretion, so works independently or whatever. So these are the things that I want to see in his answer. And then you'll see I've got a little scoring sheet here, and at the top here, I've got my key. So a score of 1 would mean that the person showed limited signs of competence. So if they can't give you an example, you want a score of 1. You will see when people fall back on, when they start their sentence with, this is what I will do. You know, when that happens, this is what, when they don't have an example, they usually fall back on like something very vague and broad, and they'll tell you what they would do. That means they don't have an example. So they haven't been exposed to that before. 2 means that the employee shows expected levels of competence. 3 means at least exceeded expectations with regards to what you want to see. And then 4 is excellent. The person showed you a very quick example, a thorough, a good one. So then you will score them a little bit higher. So every person on your panel, even if you don't have a panel, if you're the only one who does the interviews, that's also fine. Don't think that I suggest there must be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people in your interview panel. You may be a very small company, then it's only you. But if you have more than one person in the interview, you will at the end of the day add your scores. You'll see that you will have similarities, you will have differences, but you want to get to sort of like a middle point at the end of the day. You can literally work on a scoring scale as well, where you give it an actual score. And you can add up your 3s and your 2s and your whatever. The numbers will just give you a good indication. But then remember, this is not only my scores with regards to a competency-based interview. So I may give candidate 1 the preference, but if we look at the psychometric results, there's another candidate that did not do so badly on the competence, but I want to give them the preference because of all the other things that went well. So you want to integrate your results. So don't look at this one too rigidly. All right, then I want to look at supporting and cooperating. So this is my next competency that I want to look at. You must share your questions. I see there's 2 questions. Please share your questions and we'll answer them just now. So the next example is supporting and cooperating. So question 1 under this competence is, give me an example of a time when you had to work in a team to get the job done. So probing questions would be, what did you enjoy about working in a team? What obstacles did you face? Or remember, when you probe, this must be related to the example that they give you. They can't now make things up. What did you learn from the situation? And what did you do to overcome the obstacles? That is such a nice competency-based question. But remember, anything that you probe about must be related to the example that they show you. They mustn't make up new things because then they're lying. The second question, also linked to supporting and cooperating, is if a colleague is working under immense pressure, would you assist them with a deliverable, even if this may cause you to miss your deadline? So if they can give you a good example, how would you manage the situation and how would you manage the expectation regarding your own deadline? So the reason why we want to have maybe 2 or 3 questions is because there may be a good candidate where you give them a question and, like in this case, they've never ever had to miss a deadline because they helped someone else. So you want to have like another question on standby in case they just say, I've never been in a situation like that. So have another, that's why you want to have 1 or 2 questions, but you don't need to ask every single question that you've listed under that competency. Otherwise, you will never finish. Your interview process is 30 minutes to 45 minutes. This will give you a quick indication of whether it's a good candidate. You don't have to do it for 2 hours. 45 minutes max. So this is how we will score it. So in order for me to see whether this person is competent, and if I can see this in their example, does this person show interest in working in a team? Do they recognize contributions of others? You will also be able to see, have they ever worked in a team before? Because if they don't have an example, it means that they've always worked on their own. So that means that they don't have an example. Listens and communicates proactively, shows self-insight. So over here, you want to work on the same scale, and then you want to score your candidate. So the scores can be totaled at the end of the interview. Like I've said before, you add it up at the end of the day. Okay, so I want to come back to the exercise where I asked you earlier. The candidate was asked to describe a time when they've had experience, success in a teamwork environment, and describe their role in that situation. So they say, once again, I'm going to repeat it. Well, to be honest, we were just lucky to come together at the right time. I think sometimes I really work well in a team, but it really depends on whether people around me are similar to me or whether or not they like me. So I don't think it's possible to change others' points of view or opinions to get them to work together. Do you have a different opinion about this answer now? So you should agree that if you just ask someone if they are a good team player, this would have been an excellent answer. But if you are looking at, can they really express whether they've worked in a team environment where they've had success and what was their contribution, then this is really not a good answer, because there's nothing here that indicates whether they were successful or not, or whether they can actually work in a team or not. In a competency-based interview, you would not get any scores for this. So I wish I could see how many of you agreed with me now. Okay, for the last part, I just want to show you some competencies and what our typical competency-based interview sheet would look like. So you want to have a library of competencies with competency questions, with probing questions, and then your scoring sheet. So you want to have this ready already. So by the time you are recruiting for a specific position, you want to look at what does this position need. You're going to extract maybe 5 competencies. You're going to have 2 or 3 questions on each competency so that you can fall back on a question if someone doesn't have an example and you really want to know. And so you're only going to go through a few like that. It's not going to be long or complicated. You'll get a good impression immediately. For those who've done competence-based interviews before, you know that this is how it works. It happens actually quite quickly. So let's look at the example of my competency here is analyzing and interpreting. So we made a subdivision here where we said, okay, writing and reporting, because this job did a lot of writing and reporting. So in that context, we wanted to see the competency analyzing and interpreting. So my question was, describe a situation where you had to write an important report to your manager. And so this is very related to the job. So it's not very, very broad. So describe a situation where you had to write an important report to your manager. So probing questions would be, how did you go about it? What did the report aim to achieve? What feedback did you receive? What could you have done differently? Then your scoring sheet would say, writes concisely, avoids jargon, writes for the intended audience, structures information logically. So here you can write down anything that it is that you want to see. Some things you may see, some things you don't. It doesn't matter. If you have another question, you can maybe pick up some of the things that you've missed in the previous, that you did not see in the previous question. You can pick it up in the second question. So the second question is, describe a situation to me where you had to report on the status of your deliverables to your manager. So what did you say? How would you raise and any risks during the situation. What feedback did you receive? What would you have done differently? Also, don't ask all 4 probing questions one after the other. If you hear the example that they're giving you and you want to listen more, you ask the next one, which is, what did you say? Then if you feel like you want to probe more after answering it, you ask the next one, how would you raise any risk during the situation? So don't give all of this to them to answer. You want to probe as they go along. If you feel like they've stopped, you want more information, you ask the probing questions. You also don't even have to ask all the probing questions. You ask the probing questions until you feel, I've gotten what it is that I'm looking for. And sometimes you may ask all the probing questions, you feel, I just couldn't see it. I gave him a good chance, I just cannot see it. Then you can score. But sometimes if you probe, then actually the competency that they do have actually comes out. I've seen people who in the first question don't give me a great example. In the second question, then I can start seeing the competencies. But the thing is, you will see throughout your whole process, you'll see whether they're struggling to give you examples or if it starts flowing. So someone can be rusty in the beginning and then it starts flowing. Let's look at another example. Here we've got interacting and presenting. So interacting and presenting. So we were looking at that in the context of relating and networking because of the specific role. So question 1 was, describe a situation where you had to use your network in your current organization to get the job done. So they're giving you an example, then you can probe a little and you can say, well, how did you go about doing this? And what would you have done differently? And then you're going to look at, are you seeing that this person can build effective networks? Do they establish good relationships? Do they display a sense of humor where appropriate? And then let's go to a next question. Tell me about a time where you had to involve different levels of the organization in a project. So they will give an example. You can probe by saying, how did you go about doing this? What was the outcome? And if you want to probe more, what did success look like? What was the end result? It's always a good probing question, and it's related to actually many questions. Then you'll see ability to be involved in all levels of the organization, builds effective networks, establishes good relationships. So did you see that? There was another example here. Sorry, I'm going to do one more example, and then I'm going to answer your questions. So this one is creating and conceptualizing. So here we look at, provide me with an example of some key lessons that you've learned on a project. How could you use the skills that you've used effectively going forward? What difference could this have made if you had this knowledge at the beginning of the project? How could you have done things differently? So do they learn quickly? Do they understand, display understanding of the newly acquired information, encourages organizational learning, continuous improvement? Remember that what you see in the scoring sheet, this is your end result. This is what you want to see at the end of the day. Did I see it? Can they work with people? Are they okay with others? Are they effective? And then let's just do the last question. Give me an example of a time when you had to tackle a difficult task that you've never done before. How did you go about doing this? What did you learn? How could you use the skills that you've used effectively going forward? Great probing question. How could you have done things differently? So can you see the probing questions they can be straightforward and they can be similar. They can be the same in a lot of your questions as probing questions because you just flesh it out even more. So very good probing questions. And then you want to look at, did they gather information to solve the problem? Do they learn quickly? Do they display understanding of newly acquired information? Continuous improvement. All right. So I want to go to the questions quickly. All right. So the first question is, are there any restrictions in using assessment results, ability or personality test outcomes in the recruitment decisions? Any restriction using the assessment results, ability or personality test outcomes in the recruitment decision? No, as long as the tests were appropriate for the position. It doesn't help you do an engineering type of test on a person that's applying for an HR type of job. So that would be like a work type of test. But if you do psychometric assessment, you can do a normal personality and ability test combined with a competency test, and absolutely use it in the recruitment decision. There will only be a limitation if you tested your people unfairly as well, if when they were in the setting, they were treated differently, or if there were noise, or then you will have problems. But there's no legislation or anything that's blocking you from using psychometric assessments or any type of assessment. It must just be appropriate for the job. It must be fair. It must be relevant. And you are allowed to discriminate based on the job requirements, not based on the person or something about the person like religion or ethnicity or language or anything like that. The only thing you may discriminate on is the requirements for the job. So let's do the second question. I've often seen unstructured interviews used as a final round interview to give an indication about the team fit. Would this be appropriate, useful for this purpose? If you want to, if you want to just have a nice chat or discussion with almost no purpose, if you have that unstructured interview right at the end, you can't really incorporate any assumption made on that to incorporate that in your process. That will actually throw your process off, because now at that last point, someone may see something that they don't like and say, you know what, I was not totally convinced, but now I'm worried. So that could throw your process off. I would actually, as a last round, do have that last to see the fit, but I would have like an appropriate 1 or 2 appropriate last questions, just talking about the fit. But I would make it structured. I would make it count. I wouldn't just have like an informal discussion. I think you can throw yourself off. I think you could make a mistake at that last point, especially if you have candidates that's quite shoulder to shoulder. And then let's look at the last question. Please let me know if I answered those 2 top questions. If there's anything else you want to probe about, please pop it on the screen quickly. And the last question here, I make people feel comfortable by first chatting to them so they get rid of the nerves. Is this wrong? I like that because I know some people's approaches, some companies actually make you nervous because they want to see how you react. I don't like that because I feel you want to have the person in his most natural form, but in his most truthful form. So I do the same, actually, make them feel relaxed, and I don't tell them what's waiting on them, but I try and make them feel that this is we're just going to see whether this will work between us. So if it's going to be a good fit. So I make them feel comfortable as well, because sometimes people can stuff up the whole interview because they're nervous, and they could be nervous because of other reasons. They could be nervous because they haven't had a job in 6 months or a year. So you don't want to lose a good candidate because of something else that's making them stressed. So I would try and get the most authentic part of the person there and then follow through with a structured interview. Even if they are more relaxed, they may actually give you appropriate good examples. If you can see someone going like blank, when you can see, okay, they are losing it, then just give them a chance, but never deviate from your structured questionnaire. Someone stressing like that in the beginning is not an indication of their competence. I've seen it before where it actually doesn't say anything. What you see is not really counting for much. Remember that reliability is extremely low, because you've got, if you're an interviewer or recruiter or in HR, you are so used to different types of people with things that you've seen, you are colored with that impression. So just know you will be subjective and biased, even if you don't feel like it, or really your intentions are incredibly good. We can't help it. That's just normal. So if you go through your structured interview and you do pick up like a feeling or a vibe, also don't ignore that. I know that could be biased. That's what you're going to tell me. But then you fall back on more reliable things that you can do. Be even more structured in your questionnaire and throw in things like a psychometric assessment. So if you get a funny gut feel, I've always told people, don't ignore it when you get a funny feeling, but don't just make a rash decision based on it. follow through on a structured interview, psychometric assessment, reference checks, things like that. Right. Any other questions? Let me see. Well, let me just move this thing quickly. Okay, so if you need any more training or support on how to put this together, please make contact with the HR Talk, and you can talk directly to me as well. They'll give me your details, and we can assist you through it. I see there is another question. I have never done competency-based interviews. Is there any chance of getting your points? Yes, you can get our presentation. I am also in the process of fine-tuning a competency-based guide for clients. We're just making it pretty and nice at the moment, so it may not be ready right now, but please give your details to HR Talk if you want that guide. It will give you, it's just a self-help guide about psychometric testing, and then on a whole bunch of competency-based questions. So please give your details to the HR Talk if you want that guide. It will probably be ready in another week or two. So please let us know if you want that. That will help you a massive lot. But please speak to me directly if you want to fine tune it, because it's like a library of stuff. It may confuse you. If you want to fine tune it, tell us and we'll help you. And someone asked here, why is it wrong to ask someone what they can bring to the party? You can ask it, but I mean, they can tell you anything. They can tell you, listen, I can transform your company into the biggest company in the world. You've got no proof whether they can do it. What you are trying to look for is proof. So you can ask them, but I wouldn't include that in my decision-making process, because I've also seen salespeople saying that they can make 300,000 Rand a month and then they don't. I can say it, but I need to actually prove it. So another thing here, it helps me understand what they actually think of themselves, is I throw it in the middle of competency questions. You can do that, but I doubt they're going to tell you their limitations. They will only tell you what they can do that's great, and you don't have proof of it. So you can do it as a general indication, but the fact is, if they tell you that they can do something great, the fact is it the truth or not? That's your problem. You do want to see whether they can actually do it. So I would actually structure, if I want to ask them what they can bring to the party, I would get competency-based questions that will prove that. I will say, what have you done in the past to contribute to the company? I would say, what is your track record in terms of what have you delivered? Where have you impressed? That's what I would ask. So I would actually ask that question in a different way, because then he would have to provide proof, and you should get proof. Does that answer your question? Is there anything else that, okay, so agree, I would follow through from the answer to get me proof. Yes, because that's what you want to get. You want to get proof of have they done, because they are going to tell you, I'm great. There's no one in the interview that's going to tell you, listen, I'm mediocre. No one is going to tell you that. But in a competency-based answer, people may say, listen, I've made these mistakes. That worked, but here I stuffed up badly. This is what I've learned from it. In a normal interview, they're not going to tell you those things. They're actually not even going to think about it, although it would be a good thing for them to share. They're not going to think about it. So if you give them an opportunity to say, here I've stuffed up, here I'm doing better, brilliant. You're giving him an opportunity to sell himself. But if you just ask them directly, they're going to tell you that you're great, or that they are great. I see there is one more question. What do you do if they don't understand what you're asking? For example, what an income generating, what is an income generating question? Okay, so if they don't understand, it either means that they've never been exposed to that, which may be a problem, because it's going to mean that you want someone who talks that language in that position that you're looking for. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's why you want to have a second and a third question ready. If you can see you really want to get something out of this person, ask them then the second question or the third question. So if you can see that they don't understand it, have your other questions on standby. So remember, you don't have to ask every single question. It's going to take you too much, but have it on standby if you want to probe a little bit more. Okay, any other questions? Do you go over the position prior to the interview? Yes. We do want, even before the person actually comes for the interview, they need to know what the position entails, because you need to know whether you're actually on the right page. So yes, I do. They need to know the level. They need to understand the tasks, the responsibilities, everything. So that before they get to the interview, they'll tell you already, no, that's not what I thought it was going to be. So I would do it even before I meet with them. But if you want to make double sure, you can cover the requirements for the position responsibilities prior to when you start. There's no harm in doing that. I don't think anyone can make up. Yes, people can possibly Google things, but the thing is, they must still, if you ask them whether they've done it before, if you ask them whether they have generated a 300,000 Rand amount of sales in a month, they need to give you that example. The thing is, people can also Google and research competency-based questions, but they never know what you are going to ask, because your questions is going to be very specific to this role. So you're going to even tweak. Even if I give you a whole library of examples, you're still going to tweak it for your position. So, and also it's very difficult for someone to keep up the lies throughout. They can maybe lie on the first few questions, but it's very, very difficult to keep it up. It sounds rehearsed. Do you mean if a person then, which part do you mean sounds rehearsed? Like if they studied Google, yeah. The bottom line is still, even if someone Googles and researches competency-based questions, it's still going to be challenging for them to answer your specific ones. So even if they research or Google, they're going to be put on the spot to think of something quickly out of the top of their heads. So you're just minimizing the line that you can get. All right. So any other questions around competency-based questions? All right. So please, like I said, make contact with HR Talk if you want a manual with all the competency questions in it. We will have it ready maybe like in a week or two, and that will help you a lot. That will really help you and your process. Okay, perfect. So if there's no other questions, I think we can, yeah, thank you. It was nice presenting this to you as well. Please log in 2 weeks' time. I know there's another session next week, Wednesday, but in 2 weeks' time, we're going to talk about employee engagement and employee engagement surveys and stuff. So please, okay, thank you. There's people that's saying they love the input. I'm glad that you learned something, because really you don't need to struggle anymore. The struggling should stop. You should do it properly. You should really get the right people and not spend hours and hours and loads of money on getting the right people. This can really help you. All right. Someone said I was getting bored of my interviews. Yeah, because of the rehearsed answers, because everyone is going to tell you that their strengths. You're going to get the same answer, and people have rehearsed their own development areas so much. Someone, when I was younger, even briefed me about what I must say. If they ask me about development areas, it is boring. So we will help you to get guidance on this, and then you can just streamline your process. So thank you, everyone. It was really nice chatting with you. Thank you for all the nice comments. And remember to tune in next week, Wednesday. But in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have the employee engagement survey. So check out every Wednesday with HR Talk. All right. Thank you.